Ruthless K. Leroy Lawrence was a despicable, inhumane person. The madman, who was from Birmingham, was an opportunist and he did not care whom he hurt, including his own terminally ill friend, whom had suffered from liver and kidney disease and was on the end-of-life care. Now, some people could argue that Leroy wanted to put his mate out of their misery, but that would be a flat-out lie. Leroy was a thief and a K, and if it wasn't enough to inflict over 100 injuries to his friend, 45-year-old Craig Moult, whom could not scream for help, defend himself, or even run away, Leroy, while on demand for the M, he was actually said to have boasted and bigged himself up while in jail. Telling other inmates that he had K'd another man, his friend, and then taken his bank card, pissed that the transaction would not go through at the shops. West Midlands Police says that Leroy Lawrence and another mate had went to visit their ill pal Craig Moult at his flat in Boldmere Close, Sutton Coldfield, on 31st of August 2023. CCTV was able to show the moment the friend Ryan leave the house the following afternoon, which would have been September 1st, and Craig was still very much alive. 3 hours later, Leroy had left the Boldmere Close flat. By this time, Craig had been battered with some sort of blunt object and left in a terrible, terrible way. Those injuries also included blade wounds. Now, Leroy Lawrence was said to have been in a jubilant mood, pocketing Craig's bank card and other properties, which included jewellery and designer clothes. Leroy then took more items from Craig's flat that could have been used by his own 3 children. In the aftermath, Leroy had travelled to the shops and attempted to use Craig's bank card in order to buy cigs and drink and actually use it at the ATM so he could gather money so he could buy more Class A. The card declined. Now, 2 days later, Leroy went back to the crime scene, let himself back into Craig's flat and had to actually step over Craig's limp frame in order to search rooms. Now, Craig had been left slumped against the bathroom door, unmoving, unresponsive, dead. Reports say Craig and Leroy had first met in jail and the two quickly became friends. Now, Craig Moult was so loyal to Leroy that even when Craig was outside, he would often bring Leroy's children to the jail in order for Leroy to see his kids. And if Leroy was in a new relationship, Craig Moult would make the journey and drop the partner off so that they could see Leroy. That friendship, of course, continued once the both men were free. Now, Leroy went round to the flat and picked up designer clothing and jewellery, as I says, and then closed the front door behind him, leaving, but not before taking out his mobile phone and taking images and pictures of Craig Moult dead, a personal souvenir for himself, because again, Leroy Lawrence was a bad human being. Now, Craig Moult was discovered by his own brother on September 3rd, after everybody became concerned when they never heard from Craig. Now, when Leroy was arrested by West Midlands Police and told that he was under arrest for the M of his friend Craig Moult, Leroy was said to have just shrugged his shoulders, acted indifferent by saying words to the effect of, "All right, cool." Leroy did not care he had K'd his mate, a mate that had taken Leroy's own children to visit him whenever he was in jail, as I said, a mate that had Leroy sleep at his place whenever a relationship broke down, and Leroy had nowhere else to rest his head. Even on the day of the M, Leroy had been invited in by his ill friend, not sensing that anything was wrong or amiss, and the prosecution says that Leroy betrayed that trust by using a series of items including blunt objects, the handle of a mop and also a blade, to inflict over 100 injuries on a man who was already dying. Now, the prosecution also says that Craig was drunk and so was Leroy, but Leroy took advantage of that. The friend who left, Ryan Paul Ratak, had left the flat at 1:55 p.m. the following morning, and that was September 1st. The 3 men had drunk, laughed and also taken dr. Craig was alive at that time, so Ryan had nothing to do with this. Now, on his way home, Ryan had got lost and attempted to call both Leroy and Craig. However, neither man picked up the phone because through the drunken draw, Craig and Leroy had got into a silly argument. Now, from the path of red, it was suggested that the bickering started in the living room, and Leroy reacted by overpowering his weak friend, manhandling him before landing jabs and hooks and also boots, and then Leroy took Craig into the bathroom by force, where the onslaught continued. Maybe the bathroom door was quieter location or a spot easier to clean up, or maybe there was no windows for people to peer in, but what is known is Craig Moult was struck to the head and body repeatedly, over and over and over again, with items like the handle of a mop, so much so that the mop broke in 3 different places. Now, Craig Moult was propped up on a bathroom tub where Leroy took a picture. Leroy then took a bag filled with items including the bank card, Craig's own mobile phone, and also the blade tainted with red. Leroy, so carnal and sadistic, he even showed people the pictures of his crime. It has to be said that Leroy initially had no idea that Craig had died, call it in denial from drinking or sniffing, but when Leroy let himself back into the flat 2 days later in order to take more items, he did see Craig slumped against the bathroom door, unresponsive and not moving, clearly dead, without any pulse. At this point, it was evident, as I said, that Craig Moult was now dead. Now, if Leroy had any form of conscience, he would have dialed 999, but instead of calling police or ambulance, Leroy just stepped over Craig and took more items before leaving, even burglaring other people's homes. Now, Craig Moult's brother, Lee Moult, became concerned at not being able to reach Craig, and then he entered the home on September 3rd looking for his brother. Now, Lee noticed the television was damaged and a chair was stashed before he found his brother in the bathroom, lying in a fetal position on the floor, cold to the touch, which meant that Craig had been there for a few days. Now, when paramedics arrived at 6:24 p.m. that day on September 3rd, Craig was pronounced dead. Now, as I said, Leroy had been arrested, and when arrested, he says, "Alright, cool." Now, while on remand in jail, Leroy boasted to another prisoner, Dean Jones, about what he had done and asked him if he thought that he could get away with it by saying self-defense. Of course, the self-defense argument did not work. In court, Leroy Lawrence, who's 45 years old, was found guilty of DM, and he was jailed for life at Birmingham Crown Court. Leroy was called sadistic for his heartless actions he had inflicted on his own friend, his ill friend, and the judge also told Leroy that he would have to serve at least 26 years in jail before being considered for release. Does the crime match the sentence? Let me know in the comments. Stay safe.